everyone. Thank you for coming out to our year-end celebration. This is live improv storytelling. Woo! This event is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and non-binary authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds by visiting our website, a link to which has hopefully been added to the chat previously, and hopefully you all already know it, but I will add that link to the chat right now as well. I'm your host today, Terry Bruce. You usually don't see me in front of the camera. I'm usually behind the camera at all of our quick reads, door dragoning, so I am out behind the curtain today. You can find out more about me and all of the authors who will be participating today in the handout that we've prepared. That handout is downloadable from our website, so you can click that link I put in the chat, go to the handouts, and find that handout that lists all the authors, and we'll be emailing that to everyone after the event, along with the link to the digital swag bag that we've been promising and talking about in our emails. Now, a couple of reminders for those that just came in. Please note that recording of this session by the audience is not allowed, and recording of electronic communications, including Zoom meetings and webinars without permission, is illegal, including that parrot AI thing. Today we'll be featuring 8 authors who will attempt collaboratively to write a short story with you, the audience, on the spot. Before we get to that, however, a couple of quick notes for those who are just joining. We will be utilizing the chat box very heavily today. You, the audience, will be playing a part in creating these stories. So if you don't have the chat box open already, please open that up and have your fingers on your keyboards. We can't control exactly what you see on your Zoom screen. That's up to you. And I recommend that you set your Zoom view to speaker view so that all the author participants will appear large on your screen and you'll be able to see them. And closed captioning is available for this session today. You can turn that on within your Zoom controls. Look for the 3 dots, more option, and then you can turn that on there. And there should have been in some of the reminder emails some detailed steps, detailed instructions for these steps that you can refer back to if you need more assistance. All right, now that the housekeeping is out of the way, let's get going with this event. Here's how today's event will run. And this is all on the spot. This is flying without a net. So today we've got 8 authors. They will be divided into 2 teams. We'll start with the first team, who will be given a made-up opening line to a story. I'll then call on the authors on team 1, one at a time in order. I get to decide the order, to add to the story a few sentences at a time. After all the authors have gone once, so after we've gone around the circle once, audience, it'll be your turn to append onto the story. And you can send the story spinning in a whole new direction, throw in a plot twist, or whatever you want to move that story along. After take an audience suggestion, we'll send it back to the authors and we'll go around and continue gameplay in that way until we either run out of ideas and the story dies, or we bring the story to a good conclusion. Now, during gameplay, every author gets one free pass. So if an author gets stuck or gets brain freeze, they can pass to the audience and tag in the audience for assistance. So audience, be ready at any point during gameplay to jump in with some ideas of what happens next. At the midway point, so about half past the hour, we will switch over to team 2 and lather, rinse, and repeat. Okay. Now, unfortunately, can you guys all hear that ding ding that somebody's in the door? No? Okay, good. All right, so our team 1, participating authors, and host, if you can add the spotlight to these 4 authors, please. Kristen Ilarmo. Kristen writes young adult science fiction and fantasy, exploring the impact of our current decisions on future generations. Her storytelling thrives on complex family dynamics set against the backdrop of decaying societies. When she's not writing, she'll be taking long walks throughout New Orleans with her tiny, giant-eared dog. Marisa Wolf writes science fiction, fantasy, and every point between. She has published 7 co-written novels in shared universes, her debut solo novel from Bane, Beyond Enemies, over 20 short stories, and is the series runner for the Urban Fantasy Valkyries Initiative shared universe. You can find out more about her at marissawolf.net. Angela Yuriko Smith. Angela Yuriko Smith is a third-generation Ryuken American poet, author, tunist, and publisher of Space and Time magazine. A 2-time Bram Stoker Awards winner and HWA Mentor of the Year, she serves as the HWA president. That, for those of you who don't know, HWA is Horror Writers of America. Coaches authors and shares the Authortunities Hub, an online community for aspiring authors at authortunitieshub.com. And J.E. Hannaford. A love of nature, biology, and the ocean permeates throughout the pages of J.E. Hannaford's fantasy stories and pours out of the characters who live in it. All right. Authors, are you ready? All right, our first story prompt. Clancy couldn't say for sure when she stopped sleeping well, though it was probably around the time the strange noises had started in the walls. All right, authors, you ready? Kristen.
The scraping kept her up every night. It always began at 2 a.m. and ended at 3:15.
All right, Marisa.
Even 2 a.m. was just sort of a ridiculous hour because she was in Deep Woods, Maine, in a house that had been built in the 1700s, and it was winter. So it gets dark at 4. So, 5 p.m. feels like 2 a.m. 2 a.m. feels like a liminal time of which anything could happen. But what she did not expect was to find a little door at the bottom of her wall.
Interesting. J.E.
After the 4th night of scratching, at 3:15, the scratching changed to a knock on the other side of that little door. Nancy tried to ignore it, but it got louder and louder and more insistent.
Angela.
So, feeling a little bit nervous because really, what could be behind this door? She opened it up to find one night a tiny mouse in a vampire costume. And he was rapping on the inside of the door with his tiny cane, which had a tiny little skull on it of a spider skull.
Okay, this is okay. All right, so audience, what does the mouse want here? With our vampire costumed mouse want? Any suggestions from the audience? What happens next? Right, I think the audience is stuff. Okay. So let's see. The mouse asks in his best little British accent, "Could you give me some bloody tea, please?" All right, Kristen, what happens next?
I'm terribly sorry. I have not introduced myself. My name is Harold, and I'm run out of tea. And as you know, it is completely unacceptable. I don't know why you're hard of hearing, but I can tell now that you are because I've been scraping and knocking at this door for days now. But I'll forgive you, as he tightens his cravat. I'll forgive you if you can give me a spot of bloody tea. But I must say, I emphasize the bloody because, as you can see, I'm different.
All right. Marisa.
Ooh. So Clancy sees the tiny, very pointed tooth and says, all right, I do. There is tea in the house. Do you have a species preference on the blood? Can I prick my finger? Will that do like weird vampire landlord things. Like, what will that be? And Harold, the mouse, vampire lord mouse, says, I actually am pretty agnostic. He says it in a cool accent that I can't do, but I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to the species of blood. But as you can see from my cane, spider would be pretty great.
Ooh.
J.E.
Fancy holds back a bit of a smile. There were definitely spiders in the kitchen. In fact, she'd been having quite a problem with spiders.
Mhm.
Problem significant enough that now she thought of it, it might cause problems getting to the tea.
Mhm.
This is significant spider.
Love spiders.
Angela.
So, opening up the tea cabinet very gingerly and cautiously, knowing that it could be full of spiders, she looks in and she sees a spider in a little tiny werewolf costume with a little tiny cane. And the werewolf spider is looking at her and he says, "Don't you dare." And I'm going to leave it there.
If the host can get it together, audience, it's your turn. Audience. What does Clancy do when faced with this tiny spider dressed as a werewolf?
Ooh.
I think the audience is stumped on this one too. So I don't know. All right, Kristen, back to you. What happened?
Okay. Clancy blinks again. Is this real? So in my bedroom, there's a tiny door with a vampire mouse with a tiny cane. And in my kitchen, there's a cupboard with a werewolf spider. Do I need an extraterrestrial exterminator? I don't think I want to give Harold what he's asking for. I don't know what's going to happen next. What's this guy going to do? What if he has friends? What if I have the moon wrong and it's actually a full moon tonight? I don't know. I think I need help. She picks up the phone.
Marissa.
She picks up the phone and calls the unfairly handsome lumberjack who lives down the road. He has a wide array of bladed instruments in his house and hopefully some sewing needles that are sized appropriately for tiny vampire mice and werewolf spiders if needed. And so he answers the phone. His name is George. And why he is awake at 3:15 in the morning, who knows? Maybe he needs to get an early start on his lumberjacking. And so he answers the phone and he says, Clancy, I didn't expect you to need me at this hour.
All right, J.E.
Clancy says, I do. I have a little bit of a problem. I could really use your help. He hears him breathe heavily and says, I'll be right over. He doesn't live too far away. So, after fetching the kitchen cupboard, G waits by the front door to hear the knock. She opens it to find George standing there in a fairy costume with a top hat and holding a cane. I'm sorry, I was a little busy, but I'm here now.
Angela?
So Clancy says, "You're into fairies, then? I never knew." And George nods and he says, "Yes, yes. Don't judge. Don't be a judger. it's up to me. So she says, okay, well, let me show you where the problem is. So she starts ushering him into the kitchen and kind of in a little bit of a panic because, werewolf, spider, and mouse vampire, a little bit unusual for her after many, many nights of not sleeping now. So she's ushering him into the kitchen. And she goes in the kitchen, she like opens the cabinet a little bit and she's like, see, turns around and George is now reclining on the couch with champagne for some reason. And he's sipping the champagne and he waggles his eyebrows at her and he says, oh, we don't need to solve the problem in your kitchen. But if that's where you prefer, we can. And then he winks and blows her a little kiss.
The story so much. All right, audience, what does Clancy do? Or what happens next? We can throw a plot twist in. We can follow this storyline. Come on, audience.
Storyline.
You guys, do you want to see how Clancy responds to this come on from George in his fairy costume?
That's fair.
That's true. Okay, so Harold, meanwhile, Clancy starts hearing some banging on the door, the sound of Harold's cane as he raps impatiently for his tea. All right, Kristen.
I say, dear lady, what on earth is taking you so long? You haven't been able to find a single spider in this spider-infested house? Come on now. My little teeth are so tiny that I can't always get a hold of them, I need a little help. Clancy sighs. Unfairly handsome lumberjack George. This is one of my problems. I did not invite him. He does not pay rent. Yet, he bangs on my wall all night. Unfairly handsome lumberjack George squints and says, who? What? There isn't anything there. Oh, Clancy sighs. So I do have a bigger problem.
All right, Marisa.
Clancy realizes she hasn't slept in 4 days. That's problem number one. Problem number two, she hasn't seen the sun in weeks. That's also a problem. And three, she doesn't remember what was in her tea that she had the night before, which maybe is part of the issue. So she thinks, you know what, I've got an unfairly handsome lumberjack who's clearly into some fun stuff on my couch. He brought champagne. None of this is probably real, so I'm just going to lean in and enjoy the heck out of it because it means at least I'm asleep, right? So let's rage. So she goes back to her kitchen. She's like, hold on, keep that champagne poured. And then she points out to the tiny vampire spider and the tiny werewolf spider, tiny werewolf spider and tiny vampire mouse, that the vampire mouse, Harold, you have a spider skull on your cane. That's interesting. And werewolf spider, I have now noticed that there's a tiny mouse skull on your cane. So I'm going to need the two of you to figure out what happens here in this cupboard. I'm going to leave you in this cupboard. And I think I'm going to get something stronger from the kitchen.
All right, J.E.
He turns to the cupboard he usually keeps her drinks in. Retrieves flagon. Grabs a bottle of whiskey. That'll do. Before returning to unfairly handsome lumberjack George, she takes a very large swig. And strolls in with a bit of a swagger in her own step.
All right, Angela.
As she enters the room with unfairly handsome lumberjack George, she's like, it's my dream, right? So Suddenly, she's in some very alluring lingerie, and she's lost 20 pounds, and her hair is perfectly styled and coiffed. And so she's ready. This is going to be really fun. So she lets a strap fall perfectly, perfect angle, perfect lighting. One strap of her lingerie falls down off her shoulder, and she says, "So, George, I never saw this side of you." And she prepares to have a very fun dream when suddenly the cabinet doors blow off in her kitchen. Not one, not the one with just the werewolf mouse and, werewolf spider and vampire mouse in, but all the cabinet doors blow off at the same time. And she, in shock, looks back and sees an army of vampire mice and an army of werewolf spiders ready to Lord of the Rings epically do whatever they're going to do.
Oh my. This is just getting good, and we need to bring this story to a close, author, so team 2 can go. So one more round, authors. So Kristen, I'll throw it back to you.
All right. All right. So she throws down her whiskey glass, whoosh, smashes on the ground. She storms into the kitchen and says, "You're ruining my dream." And then they, in smoke, and the kitchen is silent again, and the cabinets are closed. And she says, "Oh, thank God, okay." She turns to the couch, and unfairly handsome lumberjack George is also gone. Oh. And then she hears a rap, rap, rap on the wall. She's woken up.
Marisa.
So she did fall asleep, which, a blessing, as weird as it was. But she woke up to a world that still doesn't make any sense. The wall is still making noise at her. And she sits up in her bed and she says, "Look, I know this is a really old house. I get it. If you don't want me here, just go ahead and come out and say it. But if you want to keep imagining fun stuff and we'll do some werewolf, spider, mouse, vampire war, interesting lingerie dreams, we can do that together. We don't have to work against each other. Just show yourself." Nothing happens for a long time. And she's like, "Oh no. Did I guess wrong?"
J.E.
And then her window cracks open. And she realizes the kind of knocking at the wall was actually a knocking at the window. So she wraps her covers around her tightly, peers out to see unfairly handsome lumberjack George standing below the window with a ghetto blaster, preparing to sing.
All right, Angela, bring us home.
She looks at him and how handsome he is and the ghetto blaster, and she starts making connections. And the woods in Maine are pretty lonely, not a huge dating crowd. But then she realizes she's not interested in this because her grandmother, the week before, had left a typewriter up in her attic that she had found. And she's had it sitting on her desk in her peripheral vision, kind of working on her. And she realizes there are many more exciting things in this world than unfairly handsome lumberjack George. And they are all in her head. And so she closes the curtain and she sits down and she writes out this dream. The end.
Very nice, very nice.
Awesome job, authors.
Gosh, that was fun.
It was super fun.
That was awesome.
That was
Great
awesome.
audience, give them a hand. This is not easy, and that was amazing that we actually got a comprehensive story out of that. So thank you, Team 1.
Also, I think we should all write a book together.
Yes, let's do it. It'd be so much
I
fun.
was so ready for the wall. I was like, which one's going to be casting spells?
yeah.
Which one's wizarding? What kind of smoke are they doing? And then you were like, it's half past. And I'm like,
No.
I'm ready for battle.
I know.
So much fun.
These ones with swords in them. I had that building in my head as soon as you said Lord of the Rings.
Let's party.
We'll could be the prologue to a shared novel coming soon from Strong Women, Strange Worlds. All right, well, let's bring out Team 2. So if my spotlighter wants to spotlight the remaining 4 authors, so let me introduce them as they come on stage. We have joining us now Victoria Nations. Victoria Nations writes gothic and weird horror set in liminal places. Her fiction and poetry appear in several venues, including Dark Matter magazine, Fish Gather to Listen, and Mother, Tales of Love and Terror. Victoria lives in Florida, USA, with her wife and son, who indulge her love of monsters. Haley Kavanagh. Haley Kavanagh is a military veteran, wife, and mother. She's a multiple award-winning and best-selling author and the 2-time recipient of the League of Utah Writers Silver Quill Award in 2020 and 2024. Haley is an alumna of Columbia College, a musical theater nut, and loves to dive into any book that crosses her path. Haley resides with her family in the United States. Adina Mignogna, there we go. Adina Mignogna, author of the Robot Galaxy series, is an engineer working in aerospace and a longtime science fiction geek with a strong desire to inspire others through speaking and writing about robots, AI, aliens, virtual reality, and more. And Jonna D. I think Jonna did not join us. Jonna is not here today. Okay, so just Team 3 is our 3 authors. All right, so audience, they're going to definitely need your help then because they're a person short. So are we ready?
Let's do it.
Yay! Okay, authors, you have some big shoes
got this.
to fill
We
here.
got this.
How do we follow that?
Well, hopefully this will give you something to work with. Oh, it's going to be a holly jolly holiday, all right, Doris said as she dragged the body across the floor. I'll make darn sure of that. All right, authors, are we ready? Let's start with Haley.
Okay. This had been a long time in coming, but Doris had had enough. It was time to take it home.
Adina.
While Doris could have been talking to herself, instead she was talking to her best friend, Apple. Over the course of the 20 years that Doris and Apple had been best friends, she tried to get Apple to tell her why was she named Apple. Every time she'd come up with a different response, everything from, well, my parents conceived me in an apple orchard, to my mom's excessive cravings for apples while I was pregnant. But none of that mattered right now. She had to focus. And unfortunately, her focus was not quite there because of the disturbing dreams she had had last night of mice who were lacking tea and unfairly handsome lumberjacks. So here they were, body across the floor, Doris and Apple, and
Victoria.
So Doris and Apple dragged the body as best they could. Everything about this was going to be perfect for the holidays. And the body was so heavy, but they still had managed to dress it in very festive attire by kind of tying an ugly sweater around the head wound where they had whacked them in the back of the head. And they thought the spill of blood, perhaps they could just call it kind of, red for the holidays as well, and maybe throw some fake snow over it before everyone came over for the big holly jolly extravaganza that was starting in just an hour. So once they pull the body out of view of the picture window where the beautiful glittering Christmas tree was, they had to find a place to stow it. And where would they put it during the holiday?
All right, audience, your turn. Where are we putting this body? What is this body that is being dragged around by Apple and Doris? What happens next, audience? Give us some ideas.
We've stumped the audience. We win.
In the tea cupboard.
Some tea-
Apple and Doris drag the body over to. Oh, we got.
Hmm?
We're gonna put it in the tea cupboard. Let's put it in the tea cupboard. All right, Haley.
Okay. So Doris and Apple drag the body to the tea cupboard under the stairs. Now listen, said Doris. I know that we're officially like the Santa Claus Mafia now, but it doesn't mean that we don't have our priorities straight, okay? Apple looked at her and said, please, the festival is going to start in just a minute. So let's get this done and nobody has to know.
Adina.
Okay, so when we head back upstairs, I'm in charge of getting the cookies out onto the trays, and you'll put something that blocks so no one goes down to the basement, because the last thing we need is someone heading down there, snooping around, because that's typically what, remember last year's party, when that's exactly what happened. The cupboard under the stairs is where we found Sir John. Remember that? He's a little drunk, but that's where we found him. We can't have an event like that happening this year. Does that make sense to you?
Victoria.
Apple immediately read Doris's mind, as they always did. They were always in simpatico. And so while Doris ran off to go and lay the cookies out and put out the spread, Apple said, okay, how am I going to prevent them from going downstairs and potentially seeing our tea cupboard? The first thing I have to do is cover our tracks. Because as she looked back, there were bloody footprints from the Christmas tree where they had whacked him in the back of the head, dribbling and smeared all the way down the stairs where they had drugged the body. What would she do? I know, tinsel. Tinsel will cover everything. And so she is just wildly spreading tinsel around. But unfortunately, it sticks to her bloody hands.
Oh no.
There was only one option. Blinky, she called. In a heartbeat, an elf apparated right in front of her. What is it, missus? We need to get this body hidden. Stat. I know just the thing. The elf grabbed her hands and grabbed Apple's hands and touched the body and evaporated them and completely reappeared them into a field, an icy field with an igloo. This should be the perfect place.
Adina.
Meanwhile, Doris had finished arranging all the cookies, but not before eating one or two. I mean, you have to try samples. You can't let your guests have them. And when she was done, she went looking around for Apple. Couldn't find her anywhere, but just then the doorbell rang. She wasn't quite ready, but she was a little flustered, so she went to open the door, and there was the aggressively friendly, neighborly busybody, Mrs. Brand. And Mrs. Brand said, holding out a casserole dish,
Victoria.
I know how much you love my tuna casserole that I made especially this time with olives. Doris accepts it with a gritted teeth and says, please come in, Mrs. Brand. And Mrs. Brand did. She goes, oh, tinsel is everywhere. But I guess it's fine the way that you want to decorate. So where's Apple?
All right, Haley.
Just then, Blinky appeared with Apple. All done and dusted, miss. Thank you, she said, and he toddled off. So what's the deal going on with this casserole, she asked.
Adina, what's in the casserole?
never mind my casserole, said Mrs. Brand. What was that I just saw blink in and blink out? Dora said, here, have a cookie. And you'll forget all about what you may or may not have seen, and you'll forget about the tinsel too. Oh, wait, I hear the door ringing. I think a few more guests are coming in.
Victoria.
Apple and Doris leave Mrs. Brandt by the cookies, hoping that that distracts her. And they go together to greet the guests that are coming in. And as they open the door, what do they see but their extremely mysterious neighbor who hardly ever comes out of the house and who never accepts invitations, slouching in the doorway. Her hair is in disarray. She's clutching a package under her arm that looks a little squishy and slick and says, "I need to come in right now."
All right, audience, what's the mysterious neighbor's deal? What's in the package and why does she need to come in right now? Oh, we see green goo dripping from the folded paper of the neighbor's package. So, Haley.
Something interesting popped into my home, she said. I want to talk to you about it. Nervously, they let her in and brought her into the living room. Well, go on then. I know what you did, she said.
And Dina.
Doris and Apple looked at each other. Now, there was no and they were both thinking the same thing. There is no possible way they could have possibly known about what had occurred in this house only a half hour, an hour ago. It had to have been something else. Doris whispered in Apple's ear, "Did you invite them?" Whispered back, "I thought you invited them." Whispered back, "Next year, let's lighten up on the number of neighbors we invite. Let's find some strangers. Maybe we'll go to Target and invite whoever we see there." Good idea, but we're here and we have to deal with this right now. Good. Do you think they're worried that we're just talking to ourselves? I think so. Look at how they're looking at us. Well, you say something. No, you say something. Okay, fine. I will say something.
Victoria.
Doris says, "Welcome. Can I take your wrap?" Looking at kind of the moth-eaten fur that may or may not actually be a garment or just a dead animal that the neighbor has draped around their shoulder. She lifts it and kind of throws it to the side, not unwilling to touch it. And the neighbor says, "Thanks. You would not believe what blinked into my home and said what you did." And she drags the package of green, gooey drippingness into the house and makes her way to the cookie tray. She's like, the neighbor says, "I know what you did, but I think you need to answer for this little thing that blinked in my house."
Haley.
Doris pursed her lips, unamused. There'd always been a bit of knowledge that Blinky had been sipping the Christmas sauce on the side, but also they wondered if Sasha next door was actually a Christmas witch, because she engaged in some nefarious activities that were pretty questionable, but she had half a mind to call Blinky again.
Dina.
While Doris and Apple were simultaneously panicking and also quite aware that within another half hour, there would be another 20 or so people descending upon their house for this party that they had now regretted arranging several months prior, Mrs. Brand walked in, mouthful of cookies, saying, "These are delicious. You have to give me the recipe." Oh, and then stopped in her tracks when she saw the other neighbor, one that maybe she had had a few conflicts over some HOA regulations over the years, because of course, they left their lawn grow too much and dripping things and all kinds of crud in their yard, which was, of course, against the HOA regulations. And Mrs. Brand, while she was aggressively friendly, she was also president of the HOA and made sure everybody knew it. So she quickly finished chewing and approached the other neighbor and said, "Hey, we have some things to discuss." And Apple and Doris both let out the breath that they were holding and said, "Yes, please, you guys talk amongst yourselves. We have to go finish getting the drinks ready. Yes, we have hot apple cider in the crock pot that we need to add some spices to. We'll be right back. Enjoy the cookies."
Victoria.
Sasha, the disheveled neighbor, watches Mrs. Brand walk towards her, and she wiggles her nose in kind of a half-hearted Samantha Stevens twinkle, and suddenly is draped in festive garb. She pulls herself up to her full height, holding her package, and says, "Yes, I've been wanting to talk to you too." And Doris and Apple knew they were sorted, because however that worked out, it might sort their plans out for them, and they wouldn't even have to worry about either of them. They go in to the kitchen where they're out of earshot and out of eyesight of Mrs. Brand and Sasha, and say, "Good Lord, how are we pulling this party together? I guess we're making hot apple cider. What do you want to put in it?"
All right. Well, I think I'm going to introduce a plot twist now. Before they can head to the kitchen, however, the body that Blinky had apparated away to the igloo in the tundra suddenly reappears in the middle of the kitchen. Haley.
Oh, crap, said Apple. Is Blinky messing with us again? Is he drunk again? No, well, regardless, oh God, I think it's Doris. I'm sorry. Regardless, she said, we need to get him out of here right now. So they knew they couldn't take him down to the tea cupboard. They couldn't take the body down to the tea cupboard. So they did the next best thing. They hid them among the Christmas lights outside.
Dina.
After they were done, and it took a few minutes longer than they were expected, and they were very lucky that no one had showed up, to which Apple made a mental note, wait, are people actually not coming to our party? Pluses and minuses of this situation occurring. You know, she looked at Doris and said, maybe we should just come clean. I'm sure that they would understand, what we had to do when this strange person wearing red and white just appeared in our house. I mean, what wouldn't we do? We have our security cameras, our locks, everything in place to protect our sanctuary. And all of a sudden, this strange man is just in our living room. Who wouldn't have reacted with a whack to the back of the head? Maybe everyone would understand. And Doris responded by...
Doris is like, sure. Sure, Apple. This always happens to us, though. Have you noticed that? Like every time we seem to have a gathering, there's always somebody that we end up having to whack. I think we're putting the invitation together wrong. So they grab a Santa hat, an extra one they have laying around, and they stick it on top of the body amongst the Christmas lights out front and say, we're just going to say it's an inflatable. And maybe nobody will notice. And they go back in to their very sad holiday party that at this point is only Mrs. Brand and Sasha, who is still squeezing a package that is slick with green goo. And Doris says, so we expected more people, but since it's just us, do you want to play some party games?
All right, authors, we got to bring it home now. So one last round. Let's bring this to a conclusion. And I really hope we find out what's in this green goo package by the end. Haley.
Party games were what got them into trouble in the first place with this body. So Doris did the next best thing that she knew was the most appropriate step. She called for Blinky. He operated a little bit sway and absolutely didn't seem like he was all there. What's really going on? She asked. Well, he said, I had some trouble earlier, and I just thought I'd come around and give some, put everybody in a little bit of a pickle. Yeah, that's what I thought, she said. So what's in the package? What's the green goo? He looked down really forlornly and he said, well, if I have to come clean.
Adina.
It's a Christmas present. I know you told us you didn't want anything, you didn't need anything, but please open it up. So Doris very carefully got past the really ridiculous wrapping, which once you got past the goo layer, there was a box. Okay. She opened the box, and inside was a very unusable VHS tape of Weekend at Bernie's. Now all we need is a VHS player, she said to the room. Anyone got one of those?
Victoria, close us out.
Sasha goes, I got you. And does the Samantha Stevens nose again and makes a VCR and somehow also makes the cords appear that will actually fit into today's TV. And they figure, well, Doris and Apple look at each other. This was not the holiday party that they expected, but they have cookies and they have apple cider. And they hear there might be some whiskey in that tea cupboard if they can sneak away for it. Blinky can probably bring them something. And they all get together, dripping and gooey and trying not to pay attention to the bloody tinsel. And they watch Weekend at Bernie's together. The end.
Yeah. Awesome. Give them a hand, everybody. That was awesome. We finally found out what was in that package. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us for live improv storytelling. That's all the time we have. I hope everybody had as much fun as I and the author